This module will guide you in how to use the assessment of reasoning tool to assess a learner's ability to construct a prioritized differential diagnosis. A prioritized differential diagnosis is a probability ranking of the diagnoses that a clinician is considering based on how well they match the problem representation. A clinician should first select the leading hypothesis and consider can't-miss hypotheses. Then they should consider less likely and unlikely alternative hypotheses. As a reminder from Module 2, the problem representation is a concise synthesis of the clinical problem that needs to be solved. It captures information for the following 3 questions. Who is this patient? What is the clinical syndrome? What is the time course? Clinicians compare and contrast potential diseases described as illness scripts in alignment with the problem representation. The closer the match between the problem representation and the illness script, the more likely it is that the selected disease is the explanation for the patient's presentation. The ranking of the diagnoses should be accompanied by the clinical evidence that increases or decreases the likelihood of each proposed diagnosis. In addition, some consideration is expected for the most serious or emergent diseases on the differential diagnosis or can't-miss diagnoses. An evaluator can monitor the learner's ability to reason by analyzing their spoken or written assessment for the patient's main problems. Let's look at a case now to show you how to use the ART to assess a learner's ability to construct a prioritized differential diagnosis. Julia Martinez is a 27-year-old woman with hyperthyroidism with 2 days of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and left upper quadrant pain, but no abdominal tenderness, fever, or leukocytosis. The following is an example of a high performer, which you would mark as complete on the ART. Your learner gives the following report of a patient.
The most likely diagnosis is viral gastroenteritis based on the combination of nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea and the acuity. Less likely is food poisoning because no one she dined with is sick. The location and diarrhea make appendicitis unlikely. Ectopic pregnancy is a can't-miss diagnosis in young women with abdominal pain.
In this example, the learner starts by marking tiers of probability clearly with phrases such as most likely, less likely, and unlikely. A can't-miss ectopic pregnancy diagnosis is also mentioned. He also gives the evidence for and against each condition. The following is an example of a low performer which you would mark as partial on the ART.
This patient has abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, and each has a broad differential diagnosis. I think appendicitis, ectopic pregnancy, and food poisoning are all possible and explain most of the symptoms. Although it is not a really good story for appendicitis or ectopic pregnancy, I would check a urine pregnancy while we give IV fluids and supportive care.
In this example, the learner lists reasonable diagnoses to consider and acknowledges emergent conditions. However, he does not delineate the relative probabilities of diagnoses and does not suggest evidence for or against each diagnosis. In summary, a prioritized differential diagnosis ranks diseases based on how well they match the problem representation. A prioritized differential diagnosis should include can't-miss diagnoses to ensure that the learner has considered them. A well-articulated, prioritized differential diagnosis has supporting and refuting evidence for each diagnosis.